The clang of iron on iron, the rhythmic grunt of exertion, the thumping bass of the gym's playlist. This was my symphony. At 28 years old, I, Neil, was a personal trainer, thriving in the bustling heart of a major American city. My days were a blur of pushing limits, motivating clients, and feeling the satisfying burn of muscle. I wasn't just working out, I was building something. A life of my own, forged by my own sweat and dedication. It was a good life, simple, honest, and entirely mine. My parents, however, saw things differently. They were wealthy, traditional, and in their eyes, perfectly aligned with the upper echelons of society. Their world revolved around prestigious universities, corporate boardrooms, and generational wealth. I, with my calloused hands and preference for barbells over balance sheets, was always the anomaly. The black sheep. The one who chose a path of brawn over brains, as my father so often put it. Then there was David, my younger brother. He was their golden child. Academically brilliant, destined for an Ivy League, always with a perfectly tailored suit and a smooth answer. He was everything I wasn't, everything they wanted. I'd always felt like the less favored son, a shadow to his incandescent glow. It was a quiet ache I'd lived with my whole life, a constant, unspoken comparison. The call came on a brisk Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing a grueling session with a client. It was my mother, her voice crisp, formal, leaving no room for argument. "Neil, your father and I require your presence. The lawyers have finalized the will. Be at the family estate this Saturday, 10 sharp. No excuses." A will reading. My stomach tightened. My parents were in their late 60s, in good health, but this was a formality they'd been talking about for years, a definitive statement of their legacy. I knew what it meant. A formalization of what I'd always known. David would inherit everything. Still, the summons felt heavy, a summons to my own public dismissal. I drove out to the sprawling family estate on Saturday, the sleek skyscrapers of the city giving way to manicured lawns and stately homes. The estate, with its imposing gates and long winding driveway, always felt less like a home and more like a museum. A place where things were meticulously preserved, certainly not a place for someone like me, who built things with raw effort. David was already there, of course. He greeted me with his usual detached politeness, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Neil, good to see you. You're looking robust." It was always a backhanded compliment, a subtle jab at my physique, at the expense of my intellect. I just nodded, accustomed to it. My parents sat stiffly in the drawing room, perched on antique chairs, their faces unreadable. Mr. Sterling, their longtime family lawyer, sat opposite them, a thick, leather-bound document resting on the polished mahogany table. The room was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the ticking of an old grandfather clock. The air crackled with unspoken expectations, and a quiet sense of dread settled over me. "Thank you for coming, Neil," my father began, his voice devoid of warmth. "As you know, your mother and I believe in planning, and in securing our legacy." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Indeed, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison have made their wishes very clear. I shall proceed with the reading of the primary beneficiaries." He began with the preamble, the legal jargon washing over me. Then he got to the crux of it. My heart, despite bracing itself, gave a little flutter. "To my beloved son, David Harrison," Mr. Sterling read, his voice clear and resonant, "I bequeath 100% of my entire estate, including all real estate holdings, financial investments, intellectual properties, and any and all other assets held in my name or jointly with my wife. This includes the family home, the investments in Harrison Enterprises, and all liquid assets." My breath caught. 100%. It was a clean sweep. No mention of me. Not a single asset. It was just as I had expected, yet the finality of it, the cold, stark pronouncement, still hit me like a physical blow. A sense of emptiness washed over me, a familiar companion from childhood. Mr. Sterling paused, then continued, reading from another section. An addendum. This was clearly the part for me. You regarding our son, Neil Harrison, he read, his voice maintaining its professional neutrality. It is with careful consideration that we have chosen not to allocate any portion of our inheritance to him. Our reasoning is as follows. We firmly believe that a person of only brawn and no brains, such as Neil, would be utterly incapable of effectively managing or growing the family assets. Indeed, we fear that rather than contributing to the family's prosperity, he would likely only squander the family assets through poor judgment or impulsive decisions. Such an outcome would be detrimental to the legacy we have painstakingly built. Therefore, in our assessment, he is unworthy of their legacy, and it is in the best interest of the Harrison name that the entire estate be entrusted solely to David, who possesses the intellectual acumen and strategic foresight required to not only preserve, but also significantly expand the family's wealth. The words hung in the air, cold, clinical, utterly devastating. Only brawn and no brains. Squander the family assets. Unworthy of their legacy. It wasn't just a disinheritance, it was a public indictment of my entire being, a complete dismissal of my worth, delivered with the sterile precision of a legal document. My parents sat there unmoving, their faces impassive. David watched me, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. The humiliation was a raw, burning sensation. Every insecurity I'd ever harbored, every quiet slight I'd endured, seemed to erupt at once. My throat tightened. My vision blurred for a moment, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. My father cleared his throat. We believe this is the most prudent decision, Neil, for the family's future. I simply nodded. There was nothing to say, no argument to be made. Their decision was absolute, their judgment rendered. Anything I said would only confirm their preconceived notions, their belief in my emotional impulsiveness. My quiet strength, the very thing they dismissed, was my shield. I pushed back my chair, the scraping sound loud in the silent room. I met my father's gaze, then my mother's. Their eyes were cold, resolute. No flicker of regret, no hint of a tear. Without another word, I turned. I walked out of the drawing room, past the gleaming antiques, past the stern portraits of ancestors who probably wouldn't have understood my path either. I walked out of the house that was no longer mine, not that it ever truly felt like it was. The long drive seemed even longer, the gates closing behind me with a definitive clang, sealing my fate. My heart was heavy, a dull ache residing deep in my chest. But amidst the pain, amidst the profound sense of being rejected, a quiet, fierce resolve began to stir. They believed I had no brains, only brawn. They believed I would squander their legacy. They believed I was unworthy. But my resolve was unbroken. I would build my own legacy. One not of inherited wealth, but of earned respect, of true worth forged by integrity and hard work. Their dismissal, their cold judgment, would not define me. It would fuel me. I gripped the steering wheel, the hum of the city drawing me back to the life I had built for myself, the life they scorned. And in that moment, I knew, with absolute certainty, that this story was far from over. Months melted into a blur of sweat, iron, and the satisfying hum of a life I was building for myself. The sting of my parents' will had faded, replaced by the quiet pride of my thriving personal training business. I'd expanded my client base, even started looking into a bigger studio space. The city was my oyster, built on my own terms. My parents and David were distant memories, relegated to the dusty corners of my mind. Then, the phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Neil? Neil, it's your mother!" Her voice was shrill, teetering on the edge of hysteria. This wasn't the composed, formal tone I was used to. This was pure panic. My stomach clenched. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "It's David," she wailed, and my father's gruff voice, usually so controlled, cut in, equally frantic. "He's gone, Neil. He's ruined us." My mind raced. David? Ruined them? What had the golden boy done now? They tumbled over each other with disjointed explanations, a chaotic torrent of despair. David, despite receiving 100% of the entire inheritance to invest in his brilliant ventures, had plunged them all into financial ruin. He had taken the inheritance, the family legacy, and turned it into a bottomless pit of crippling debts through reckless, ill-conceived business dealings. "He invested it all in some cryptocurrency scheme," my mother sobbed, "and a chain of bespoke dog bakeries. He said they were the future, and now it's all gone. He was forced to sell off all family assets." My father's voice was hoarse with suppressed rage and shame. The summer home, the antique cars, the art collection, everything. He liquidated everything and just vanished. "He even sold this house, Neil," my mother cried, her voice cracking. "Our home, the one we've lived in for 40 years. He sold it out from under us to cover his gambling debts. And now he's gone, completely gone. He disappeared overseas, and he's cut off all contact." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The irony was suffocating. They had disinherited me, the brawn and no-brain son, to protect their legacy, entrusting it all to David, the intellectual acumen. And he had systematically, utterly destroyed it. Not just their inheritance, but their very home, their security, their future. And then he had vanished, leaving them to face the consequences. "Now, the creditors are foreclosing on his parents' home," my father finished, his voice breaking. "They're coming tomorrow, Neil. They're coming to take the house." My first instinct was a cold, bitter satisfaction. "You reap what you sow," a voice whispered in my head. "This is what you get for playing favorites, for judging by bank accounts instead of character." But then I heard the genuine terror in my mother's sobs, the defeated tremble in my father's voice. They were elderly. They were facing homelessness, abandoned by the very son they had championed. The bitterness faded, replaced by a deep, familiar sense of responsibility. They were still my parents. They were still in trouble. And I, the son they deemed unworthy, was the only one left. Without a moment of hesitation, I said, "I'm coming home." The drive out to the estate felt different this time. The imposing gates, the long, winding driveway, they no longer symbolized a museum of judgment, but a family under siege. As I pulled up, the sight that greeted me was stark. A large, menacing foreclosure sign hammered into the immaculate front lawn. A burly, intimidating man stood on the porch, flanked by two equally imposing figures, their arms crossed, surveying the property with predatory eyes. Loan sharks. This wasn't just a bank. This was serious. I parked my rugged pickup truck next to a sleek, black SUV. As I stepped out, the lead creditor, a man built like a brick wall with a shaved head and a grim expression, turned his attention to me. His eyes, hard and shrewd, took in my athletic build, my gym clothes. He was clearly expecting some bewildered elderly couple. He certainly wasn't expecting me. My parents appeared in the doorway, pale and distraught. "Neil, you came!" my mother cried, rushing towards me, her face streaked with tears. My father followed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The lead creditor stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. "You, the son. This property is being seized tomorrow morning. Your brother, David Harrison, defaulted on a loan backed by this property. He's gone. We're taking possession." His tone was flat, non-negotiable. I stepped forward, putting a reassuring hand on my mother's shoulder. I met the creditor's gaze, holding it steady. He was big, but I'd trained clients bigger. I had faced down angry bodybuilders and stubborn athletes. I knew how to project calm, controlled strength. "I understand," I said, my voice even, surprising even myself. "My name is Neil Harrison. I'm David's brother, and these are my parents. They had no idea about David's dealings. This is their home. They lived here for 40 years. The creditor's eyes narrowed, assessing me. He probably expected bluster or pleas. I gave him neither, just quiet resolve. "Look," I continued, "I'm not here to argue the legality. You've got the papers. But my parents are elderly. They can't just be thrown out onto the street. They have personal belongings, sentimental items. They need time to pack." He considered me, his gaze sweeping over my broad shoulders, my firm stance. He saw not a pushover, but a man of imposing physique. And, surprisingly, his tone softened. Just a fraction. It was still business, but the edge of immediate aggression was gone. Perhaps he sensed that while I wasn't going to fight him legally, I certainly wasn't going to be intimidated. Perhaps he realized a calm negotiation with me was preferable to a messy, potentially public, eviction of an elderly couple. "Look, pal," he grunted, his voice still gravelly, but less threatening. "We got our orders. The bank wants this property cleared, and David is nowhere to be found. But I'm a reasonable man. I can give you 3 days. 3 days to move everything out. The house needs to be empty by sunrise on the 4th day. No exceptions. You got it? 3 days. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. It was more than I expected, certainly more than David had secured for them. It was enough. I nodded. "Understood. Thank you." He gave me a curt nod in return, then turned and barked orders at his men. They began placing official, seized property notices on the windows and doors. My parents watched, their faces etched with despair. "Neil," my mother whispered, clutching my arm. "What are we going to do? Where will we go?" I looked at her, at my father, both of them broken and lost. The house, once a symbol of their judgment, was now simply a place where they were losing everything. And the son they had trusted with their entire legacy had vanished. "You're coming with me," I said, my voice firm. "To the city, to my place." My father finally spoke, his voice cracked with shame. "Your apartment, Neil. It's small, not like this, and your gym schedule." "It's not my apartment anymore, Dad," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "It's our apartment, and we'll figure out the schedule. We have 3 days to pack. Let's get to it." I knew it wouldn't be easy. My parents, accustomed to a sprawling estate and a life of privilege, would chafe at the confinement of my modest city apartment. They would mourn their lost world and probably blame me in quiet ways for not being David. But I didn't care. They needed me. And I, the son they had rejected, would be there. I would bring my brawn to bear on this problem, and my quiet determination. This was my legacy now, picking up the pieces. As I watched the foreclosure notices being taped to the front door, the grim reality of their situation sank in. They had lost everything, all because of David's reckless brains. And here I was, the brawn, the one they had deemed unworthy, the only one standing between them and the streets. The irony, once bitter, now felt like a heavy, undeniable truth. My modest city apartment, a space I'd curated for my own disciplined, solitary life, suddenly became a crowded refuge. Moving my parents was a Herculean task. They were accustomed to sprawling rooms and servants, not compact living, and a son who personally hauled boxes. Yet they had no choice. I stacked their antique china in cardboard boxes and carefully wrapped crystal, the very items deemed part of a legacy I was unworthy of, now entrusted to my brawn. My distraught parents were now living in my city apartment. The transition was, predictably, jarring. My mother, usually so fastidious, wept over the lack of space, the noise from the street below, the indignity of sharing a bathroom. My father, typically stoic, paced incessantly, his silence heavier than any accusation. They clung to the hope that this was temporary, a brief blip before David, their golden boy, would swoop in and somehow fix everything. Despite their dire situation, their first and most fervent action was to try and reach David. My mother clutched her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed his international number repeatedly. My father sent increasingly desperate emails to old business contacts, trying to trace his favored son. Their faces, pale with anxiety, would light up with a flicker of desperate hope each time the phone rang, only to fall back into despair when it wasn't him. "He'll call, Neil," my mother would insist, her voice thin. "He just needs time to sort things out. He's brilliant. He'll find a way." I watched them, the familiar ache of being the lesser son resurfacing. Even now, stripped of everything, they clung to the delusion of David's inherent superiority. I said nothing. I simply brewed their tea, made them toast, and continued to go to work, leaving them to their futile attempts. But days turned into weeks, and the calls to David remained unanswered. His phone numbers were disconnected. His email accounts went dark. The few contacts my father managed to reach confirmed that David had, indeed, fled the country and severed all ties. He was gone. Completely. The devastating realization that their favored son had truly abandoned them plunged them into a despair far deeper than financial ruin. It was a spiritual collapse. They had built their entire identity, their sense of worth, around David's perceived brilliance and his destined path, and he had not only squandered their legacy, but had also shattered their faith in him, in themselves. My mother, once vibrant and commanding, became listless, retreating into her room, refusing to eat. My father, who had always prided himself on his physical and mental fortitude, developed a tremor in his hands and a persistent cough. They both fell ill, not just with physical ailments, but with a profound, soul-deep sickness. The shock, the humiliation, the abandonment, it had broken them. And suddenly, there was only me. I, the son they had dismissed, became their sole caregiver. My life, once dictated by gym schedules and client sessions, transformed overnight. I canceled clients, put my studio expansion plans on hold. My modest apartment, already a tight squeeze, became a sick room. I cooked for them, simple, nourishing meals, trying to tempt their appetites. I cleaned the apartment meticulously, ensuring every surface was spotless, something my mother, despite her illness, still subtly scrutinized. I managed their medication, remembering dosages and timings, things David, with all his brains, would likely have forgotten. I made doctor's appointments, navigated insurance complexities, and drove them to checkups, patiently enduring my father's quiet sighs and my mother's occasional irritable complaints. My days began at dawn, checking their temperatures, preparing breakfast. Then came work. I'd open the gym early, train a few loyal clients, trying to keep my business afloat before rushing back home. Evenings were spent washing dishes, doing laundry, listening to my parents' increasingly frail voices, recounting old memories, often wistfully recalling David's childhood achievements. It was during these trying weeks that the unspoken truths began to surface. My parents, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their illusions, were forced to confront the reality of their situation. And the reality was me. Not the son they had wanted, but the son who was actually there. They saw me patiently coaxing my mother to eat a few spoonfuls of soup, my hand gentle on her forehead. They saw me, exhausted after a long day, still sitting by my father's bedside, listening to his rambling fears about the future. They saw me cleaning up after them without complaint, managing their medication with a diligence they never expected. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible at first. A hesitant thank you from my mother. A rare, almost embarrassed nod of approval from my father. Then, moments of profound vulnerability. One evening, my mother, feverish and weak, looked at me, her eyes clouded with tears. "Neil," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "David, he always promised. He always said he'd take care of us. He was so clever, so capable." She paused, a fresh wave of tears rolling down her temples. "We were so wrong about you, weren't we? We thought you couldn't manage anything. But look at you. You're managing everything. You're keeping us alive." My father, from his armchair, cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on the wall, but his voice was surprisingly clear. "We judged you, son. Harshly. We saw what we wanted to see in David, and we dismissed you for not fitting our mold. We thought his intellect was everything. We thought you had no depth, no real character." He finally turned to me, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing regret. "We were fools, Neil. Absolute fools." The words, so long desired, so desperately needed, hung in the air. Decades of feeling invisible, of being the lesser son, began to unravel. The pain was still there, but it was accompanied by a strange, cleansing release. It was during these trying weeks that I saw my parents truly seeing me, realizing that I, not David, was the truly devoted son, the one with integrity and genuine care. They saw past the brawn, past their preconceived notions, to the core of who I was. They saw my unwavering loyalty, my quiet strength, my capacity for unconditional love. It was a devastating, heartbreaking way for them to learn, but they were learning. And I, the son who had always craved their acceptance, finally felt truly seen. The atmosphere in the apartment, once thick with unspoken resentment and despair, slowly began to shift. The air, though still heavy with their recovery, was now tinged with a fragile new understanding. The shared vulnerability had melted away years of emotional distance. We were no longer parents and a dismissed son. We were simply three humans navigating a crisis together. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly indispensable to them. The unworthy son had become their lifeline. The air in my apartment, once heavy with unspoken resentment and despair, finally began to lighten. My parents, still frail but recovering, had genuinely apologized for their past blindness, their words a balm to decades of quiet hurt. We were a family again, not the perfect unit they had always envisioned, but a real one, forged in the fires of adversity. A fragile peace had settled over us, built on honesty and a newfound appreciation for each other. Then, the quiet calm shattered. The news arrived not with a bang, but with a series of hushed phone calls and urgent emails, whispers from the financial world that still revolved around my parents' former social circles. The lead creditor, the burly loan shark who'd given me 3 days, was relentless. He had successfully tracked down David abroad. My father's phone buzzed constantly with calls from unknown international numbers. He'd answer, his face would drain of color, and he'd hang up, shaking his head. "They found him," he'd finally admit, his voice barely a whisper. They're seizing his assets. David, the golden boy, the intellectual powerhouse who had flaunted his inherited wealth and vanished without a trace, was now being hunted. He was being stripped bare by the very system he thought he could outsmart. The details trickled in over the next few days. David's investments weren't just reckless. They involved shady dealings with a notorious international crime syndicate, the same group that Tiffany's crew had been part of. He'd been entangled in their illegal operations, blinded by the promise of quick, enormous returns. Now, with the syndicate facing heavy pressure and their own members getting arrested, David was being left out to dry. My parents, despite their fragile state, watched the unfolding drama with a mix of horror and a grim, almost detached understanding. They saw their cherished dream, their brilliant son, unravel completely. He was making desperate pleas for help, not to us directly, but through intermediaries, through old family friends, desperate for someone to bail him out once more. "He's asking for money, Neil," my mother said one morning, her voice flat, devoid of her usual hope when it came to David. "He says he's lost everything. He's begging for us to send funds, to hire lawyers for him." My father looked at me, his eyes tired but firm. "He's destitute, Neil. He says he has nowhere to go." The familiar ache of duty, the ingrained habit of protecting them, flared for a moment. My brother, in trouble. But this wasn't the kind of trouble I could fix with brawn or a few $1,000s. This was the consequence of his choices, choices that had brought us all to the brink. I took a deep breath, and the words came out clear, steady, resolute. "No." My parents stared at me, surprised. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. "We gave him everything once. You gave him your entire legacy, your trust, your unwavering belief. And what did he do with it? He squandered it. He used it to fund reckless, illegal ventures. He abandoned you, leaving you homeless and sick. He didn't just spend the money. He destroyed the foundation you built for him." I continued, looking from one parent to the other. "This is not about helping a son in need anymore. This is about enabling a pattern of self-destruction that has already cost us all too much. He made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. If we bail him out now, he will never learn. He will never take responsibility. He will just find another scheme, another way to hurt himself and everyone around him." My parents were silent, their faces etched with a profound sadness. I could see the battle in their eyes, the lingering desire to protect their favored son, warring with the raw memory of his betrayal and their own suffering. Then, my father, usually the more traditional and forgiving, slowly nodded. "You're right, Neil," he said, his voice raspy. "You're absolutely right. We taught him nothing by giving him everything." My mother, tears welling in her eyes, reached out and took my hand. "It hurts, Neil," she whispered. "It hurts deeply. But you're right. We can't help him anymore." And so, despite David's desperate pleas, neither I nor my parents offered assistance. We had given him everything once, and he had squandered it. Not just the money, but the trust, the family name, and his own future. It was a stark, agonizing lesson in consequences for all of us. The final news of David's downfall came through a mutual acquaintance. David, stripped of all wealth, his international accounts frozen, his reputation in tatters, was deported back to the U.S. without a penny to his name. He was indeed forced to live in a government-subsidized shelter, a stark, humbling contrast to the life he once expected. The intellectual acumen that my parents had so revered had led him to ruin, while my brawn had saved our family. It was a bleak ending for him, and yes, I was saddened by my brother's downfall. He was still my brother, and I wouldn't wish homelessness on anyone. But I felt no remorse for our decision. His actions, his choices, His complete disregard for others had led him here. He had chosen his path, and it was a path of destruction, and the consequences for those around him were even more severe. Tiffany's crew, the crime syndicate that had enabled David's reckless investments and engaged in even shadier dealings, were facing even harsher legal consequences. They were major players, and their unraveling served as a stark reminder of the dangerous world David had chosen to inhabit. His own downfall was a direct result of his entanglement with them. With David out of the picture and his shadowy connections dismantled, our fragile peace solidified into something enduring. My parents continued to recover, both physically and emotionally. The cramped city apartment, while functional, wasn't ideal for their long-term health and comfort. So, I made another strategic move. I had been saving meticulously, reinvesting profits from my growing gym business. I began looking for a new place, not a mansion, not an estate, but a comfortable, accessible home. I found a lovely, smaller house with a manageable yard just a short drive from my gym. It was in a quiet, friendly neighborhood, perfect for them. I continued to support my parents, moving them into this new, comfortable home. It was bright, airy, and most importantly, it was our home, built on my efforts, not on inherited wealth or expectations. My life, built on my own merits and integrity, brought me profound peace and an unexpected, truly meaningful legacy. I learned that true value lies not in inherited wealth or perceived intellectual superiority, but in unwavering character, loyalty, and the strength to stand by those who truly matter. My parents had judged me by their narrow definition of success, dismissing my physical strength and practical skills. But it was those very qualities, combined with the loyalty they had once overlooked, that ultimately saved them. I continued to build my business, expanding my gym, mentoring young trainers. I found joy in the simple things, a successful training session, a quiet evening with my parents, watching them finally find genuine peace. Our family was forever changed, but stronger, truer than it had ever been. We had lost a fortune, but gained something far more precious, an honest, loving connection, forged in adversity and upheld by integrity. And that, I realized, was the only legacy that truly mattered. And so, Neil's journey, from the shadows of disinheritance to becoming the steadfast foundation of his family, reaches its satisfying conclusion. His story is a powerful testament to the true meaning of worth, reminding us that character often shines brightest when all other lights fade. If Neil's quiet strength and his triumph over unfair judgment resonated with you, if his story inspired you to look beyond superficial success, please consider giving this story a like. Your support helps us share narratives that explore the depth of family bonds and the enduring power of integrity. For more compelling stories about resilience, unexpected turns of fortune, and characters who redefine success, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We genuinely invite you to comment below with your thoughts on Neil's difficult choices, your own experiences with perceived favoritism, or any insights this tale may have sparked within you. We truly value your feedback and appreciate every single comment. Thank you for joining us on Neil's Unlikely Inheritance. We look forward to connecting with you again.